Okay, good afternoon. My name is Mikkel and I'm coordinating the UNTANGLED project. I'm here with Melanie Arntz, who is a professor of economics at the ZIW, and Robert Stehrer, who's part of the project from wiiw. And we have just held a very nice webinar where we talked about AI, the labor market and the future of work. Many good questions, but I have one last question I would like to pose to Melanie and Robert. And I want them to think about going back to 2001. So we are just after the dot-com crash. Then someone comes along to them and say, you know, in the next 20 years, China will join the WTO. There will be massive investment in robotics, massive investment in digital infrastructure. In 10 years, so in 2010, actually 2008, you will have a very powerful telephone in your pocket, which is more powerful than your laptop. And so I would ask you, imagine you're there. How would low-skilled workers do in this environment? Melanie?
In 2023.
In 2023, after 20 years of this development.
Yeah, I probably would have thought, well, high unemployment rates, poor wages. So my initial thought would probably have been rather negative. But on the other hand, I mean, we know that the future was different, or the future today is different, and we probably underestimated, or I would have underestimated certain trends that are to the favor of also low-skill and low-wage workers in our labor markets. Which on the one hand is that, of course, whenever we have new technologies, there are all these equilibrating forces that at the end of the day also allow for low-wage workers to benefit from these technologies. So if they are employed in firms that adopt these technologies, they will also experience rising wages and the like. So this is sort of the one story. There are all these productivity effects that at the end of the day also benefit other kind of workers. And the other thing, of course, is that labor shortages have been kicking in the last years, and this is what we now feel in many sectors, and which really puts an upward pressure on wages and also on improving labor conditions. So in a way, I think the situation today is even much better than I could have imagined in 2001, yes, for these kind of workers.
And I have the impression that you would probably say the same, Robert. I will give you a second and you can add. No, you won't. Then I would like to hear what you would say.
Well, my impression in 2001 would have been much more optimistic. In a way, there was a lot of expectations on benefits of European integration at this time, globalization in general, global integration and so on, and also a lot of expectations on these new technologies, particularly computers, ICT technologies, to improve working conditions, to make life easier, to make to reduce employment efforts. At this point in time, I think there was already a feeling that this ICT does not destroy too many jobs. So we had this in the beginning of the 1990s, the end of work, as some dubbed it. But at this time, I think there was much more optimism in a way. So maybe to switch it back to 2023, what has been the broken promises? Maybe we have under-expected what have been the work requirements to come with this ICT revolution. So much more flexibility, much faster upskilling, reskilling needs, and the impact on the wage distribution in a way that we face much more inequalities in terms of wage distribution, at least today, than in say 20 years ago. Not saying that in level effects the unskilled workers have lost, but in relative terms they have not benefited that much as some, say, skilled workers or more flexible workers and so on.
I think that's a good point, and I think I could take that and maybe throw this back to Melanie in the sense that we could say, I would rather ask it as a question: do we have a good measure, or do we know well that actually the labor market is moving at a faster pace now? coming on from what Robert said, that there's much higher retraining needs at the moment. But do we have a good measure of that? Are we moving at faster speed, so to speak?
I don't think so. The reason is that, I mean, we are talking about reallocations, right? And reallocations are always costly and there are frictions, and I don't see why this should be any faster now than it was like 10 years ago. I think what we feel is the sense of the way we work is changing, right? There was all this remote virtual collaboration, for instance, and of course everyone talking about AI, large language models now coming to the workplace. So there are things changing, of course, but I think in terms of labor market changes that really are some structural or restructuring, really, these processes are not really faster than they used to be, because this necessitates training, it necessitates people orienting themselves on the labor market and finding new places for their skills. And I think this takes time, and it actually, in a period where you have so many things going on, this process may actually be even more difficult, because people need some ideas about where the trends are actually going to then follow these trends and move to maybe sectors that are growing or occupations that are growing. No.
Thanks. And an important piece of research from the UNTANGLED project is actually, as Robert said, that some groups have lost out, mostly lower skilled or routine-based workers have lost out. But one thing we also found in the research was that the welfare system had picked that well up. I don't know if you have an additional comment to this. So they had lost out in terms of wage and employment, but the welfare system, I mean, in terms of their income replacement, had more or less replaced their income, so to speak.
Well, to a certain extent.
To a certain extent.
To a certain extent, and depending on country specificities, I think this was the case. Looking now more into the future, so to say, this becomes a tricky issue, because we face these demographic challenges, and to finance this sort of redistribution and help for those in need better becomes a challenge for the future then.
So, Melanie and Robert, to close this afternoon, what is the key conclusions we had from the panel debate? Melanie.
Well, in like 50 words. Let's see if I can make a short statement on that, because we discussed everything, right? But I think we all agreed that there is a chance for a golden age because of the combination of, AI boosting productivity, labor shortages, helping low-skilled workers, and all that. But we also discuss a lot of risks, and these risks are that we are not good enough in helping people relocate between sectors and occupations, because they do not really know where the benefits are from this, that our labor markets might not be inclusive enough to also take with us groups that are disadvantaged. And I think this was what we did. And we also discussed that labor shortage, on the one hand, can be helpful, of course, for certain groups and improve wages and labor conditions. But of course, labor shortage itself is sort of the biggest threat to transformation. And so addressing labor shortage is probably what we need to do first and foremost.
Thanks. Robert.
Well, let me summarize in a very few words. So, all these new opportunities we see from new technologies, ICT, robots, artificial intelligence technologies create new opportunities, but in the same time these create new challenges. And how to cope with these challenges, and as mentioned by Melanie, is not a technological issue, is a societal issue which has to be solved out in public debate to cope with these societal challenges.
Thank you.